It's Only Sport with Martin Devlin on The Platform. Brought to you by One New Zealand. Let's get connected.
He's known as the voice of rugby in Australia. He's been working broadcasting and writing and covering the sport for over 40 years. He's an absolute legend in this business, my side of the microphone. It's a very warm welcome onto the program to Gordon Bray. Thank you for joining us, mate.
Great to be with you, Martin.
Australian Rugby Immortals. I'll tell you what a great time to release this book. It is a super look at some of the greatest names in Australian rugby. I just think it's perfectly timed. Congratulations on that.
Well, thank you. Yes, I think I was first approached during COVID, so I had a bit of time to think about it. And to bring it out when it's come out, I think the timing has been perfect because one of the aims of the book was really to reacquaint young players with these greats who got us to the summit of world rugby.
Yeah, look, and it's so easy to forget. Okay, it's 25 years ago, but that decade of winning 2 World Cups in a decade. Look, you know, Australia did it before the All Blacks did it, before South Africa did it. And then you go back and you track back into, obviously, the 1980s. You've got the Yalla brothers and that 84, that tour of the UK to win that Grand Slam. Beating the All Blacks in 1986 here in New Zealand. Look, it's such a rich history, and that's why I say it's so well timed. Because, you know, to anyone who's actually loving rugby in Australia, who's actually despondent and despairing at the moment because the Bledisloe Cup's been here for what feels like a couple of centuries, there is a rich history here, which I'm so glad that you're actually writing about.
Well, it's actually a time capsule of the high points of Australian rugby right through our test history and going right back to our first test against New Zealand, the beginning of the 20th century. And so that in itself, I think, is very important historically. But, yeah, there have been so many great moments for Australian rugby and even going back before the 80s. I mean, Greg Cornelson, his 4 tries at Eden Park in 1978.
Yes.
I still think a wonderful call there by Keith Quinn. I still think that's one of my favourite all-time test matches. Then you go back into the 60s in the Catchpole era. John Thornett, that wonderful tour of South Africa in 1963 when the Wallabies won back-to-back test matches. First time South Africa had lost 2 matches in a row on home soil since 1896. And then the famous Waratahs in 27-28. So the history's there. Not so great before World War I, but we did have our moments. But, it's there over 125 years and more than 900 Wallabies.
I love the fact that you've got Skylab in there, one of the greatest nicknames ever. And for those who don't understand, Skylab was this piece of space junk which was flying around and landed in Australia in the outback somewhere, didn't it? Back in the 70s, if I remember rightly, as a kid. I remember that story.
Yes, well, I think I won't query you on that bit of accuracy, but Skylab was Steve Cutler. I was on the tour of New Zealand in 1982 when all of those Queenslanders pulled out and Mark Ella became the captain. And Skylab, I think, came on in the second test against the All Blacks, a famous win in Wellington.
Yeah, that's right. Campo's debut, not his debut, but it was one of his first games too.
Yeah, that was his second game, second test match at a 19-year-old. And Skylab then came on. I think Duncan Hall sustained a nasty injury, courtesy of one of the All Black back rowers and put him out of the series. He was our best tight forward. But Skylab was over 2 metres tall. I think my favourite line with him was that he was doing his thesis on the seasonal reproduction cycle of the ewe. Now, I actually got that into a commentary. I got that, Martin, at the wrong time because Australia was just about to score a try and I totally stuffed up the try.
Oh, no, really? Look, I mean, your comment.
I learned my lesson, though.
Well,
I learned my lesson.
You know, we all drop a few, don't we? That's the nature of this business. I bumped into, I'm not name dropping here, I bumped into Campo a couple of weekends ago in Wellington. It was just wonderful to bump into him. And I was there in that corner when he goose-stepped past Stu Wilson at Athletic Park that day. You know, he to me is one of the saddest stories. I mean, the guy's driving an Uber at the moment. He's such a brilliant brain. He's got so much to offer and he's been shut out of Australian rugby. I don't know whether Australian rugby can afford to lose a guy like that, can they?
No, we can't. And I think Australian rugby is definitely trying to re-embrace Campo. He's, as you say, he's more appreciated outside his own country. I think one of my favourite quotes in the whole book, in the Campese chapter, Martin, came from James Curran, a modern history professor, who wrote a book called The Last of the Dream Sellers, Campese. And here's the quote: "Campese seem to operate on cross-grained pure instinct. one that left many a defender not only clutching in vain at the invisible, but stranded in his audacity's slipstream. He followed no straight path, observed no rule book, conjuring wizardry across the open field. His play was unbridled, unstructured, untamed, unpredictable, and at times uncontrollable. The result was some of the most exhilarating feats ever seen by an Australian sportsman, unquote. How's that?
Fantastic. Look, and I'm just thinking straight away when you say, I just remember 86, obviously 1991 in that semi-final when he absolutely destroyed us, scored the try and then the over-the-shoulder pass. Look, he was a maverick kind of player, but just so superbly skilled. Gordon, when you think about it, and you say this, the other thing about the Wallabies at this time is, we talk about the All Blacks being inventive, but the Wallabies invented their own style of rugby. And how important is it that somehow you get to recapture that again?
Well, I think Joe Smith's aware of that, and I think Peter Crittall, the great Wallaby, who was in South Africa in '63 and became a New South Wales coach and president of Australian Rugby, he pinpointed the 1927-28 Waratahs tour to Britain as probably the most significant side that ever left our shores, because their whole belief was that the best chance of success lay in exploiting the running and handling skills of all members of the team. Whenever possible, defence was to be turned into attack and kicking a last resort. And that's always been the Australian way. And I think the All Blacks learnt from that in the 80s when the Ellers came along. Mm-hmm. And I think Joe Smith's aware of that. He's trying to re-establish that Australian way, which is about risk-taking, about the stuff that Campese was able to produce. It's a lot harder now with all this blitz defence and the size of some of the opponents. But I think we have seen some incremental improvements from the Wallabies this year. Gordon
Bray, Australian Rugby Immortals. Now, we have Greg Marto on every Friday, and I'm going to mention, so is he in your book? Because I would love the answer to be no, so that I can say I'm looking through the book and can't find you, Greg.
Yeah, well, you can't find him there because so when you look at some of the fullbacks who missed out, I was told I could only have 15 Immortals. Rugby League has 13 Immortals. I said I need 30. And you look at some of the fullbacks who missed out. Roger Gould, who was on that tour in 1982.
Man, and he could kick for 60 metres.
It's Only Sport with Martin Devlin on the platform. Brought to you by One New Zealand. Let's get connected.